So, the subject of the next session is reality explorations from scientific, mathematical, philosophical and Vedantic research, methodologies and their synthesis. So, to present that here on the stage, I'd like to invite Professor Ramgopal Uppaluri, Department of Chemical Engineering, IIT Guwahati. So before we start, I'd like to give a small introduction about him. Professor Ramgopal Uppaluri holds a PhD Process Integration from University of Manchester, UK in 2002. And he has done his MTech from IIT Kanpur in Chemical Engineering in 1999. After his postdoctoral research at Robert Gordon University, Scotland, he joined IIT Guwahati as faculty in Chemical Engineering Department. He has guided 11 PhD students and published 82 international journal publications and filed 3 Indian patents, inspired and motivated with the grand vision of Dr. T.D. Singh, the founding director of Bhakti Vedanta Institute and a world pioneer in science and spirituality synthesis dialogue. Professor Uppaluri attempts to contribute his non-professional activities to the mission of the Bhakti Vedanta Institute. He was instrumental to compile the writings and the dialogues of Dr. T.D. Singh and Sri A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami to offer a graduate diploma course, Correspondence in the Science Spirituality from July 2015. So let's enjoy Professor Ramgopal Uppaluri's lecture now. Thank you. Put your hands together and welcome, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon, one and all. I hope you had good lunch and you are not drowsy. Today, I'll be looking into the reality from my own world. My own world means I am a faculty of chemical engineering and we do research. So, I've been teaching a course called Research Methodology in the IIT. So, from there I got inspiration, and this year I have taken this as the topic of my presentation. So, you can see 2 swans here coming together. So, the meaning of this is that it is symmetric. That is, whether you do scientific study or philosophical study or spiritual study, it needs to be convergent. And of course, you can have a divergent effect also for the research that you do. But if you do divergence, then you won't enjoy the beauty. Just like mathematics. The field of mathematics, the moment you integrate it into physics, then you will feel the power of mathematics. You will feel that mathematics is not just your speculation, it has some validity to describe the system physically. It has some validity to design defense equipments like missile systems using classical mechanics, which is again having the background of calculus. So, pure philosophy, pure science, pure spirituality, if you try to bring in, then probably you may not have the synergy. But if you see the overlap, if you try to see the overlap, and that's what I am trying to go and do today, that I am trying to see it from a researcher perspective. Next, please. So the presentation has 5 sections. Introduction, scientific, mathematical and philosophical research methods, a glimpses of reality beyond perception, Vedantic perspectives, synthesis perspectives, and conclusions. So I'll be starting things like scientific, because that's where I work. From my day-to-day research, I try to take up some examples, and from there I'll gradually go into the Vedanta. But before I go there, let me try to give you some understanding about reality. You have heard so many words, so many presentations, but probably they are highly mathematical and they are less towards the reality. So let me go to the reality. My understanding or definition of reality is the very foundational stage of the existence of a particular thing or a concept, and this is not related to your ability to perceive it. Just like I have a hanky, if I just leave the hanky here, now if I see the hanky or not, the hanky is there or not? The hanky is there. But the moment I see it, then obviously I am conscious about it. And that's what I call here as perceived reality. And there are some notions in the reality that are beyond my capacity. And that's what I call as absolute reality. That means a reality that is beyond my comprehensibility or ability to look into it. So today we have several sciences. We have the empirical sciences, we have the mathematical sciences, we have the biological sciences. And you see many founding fathers in science or philosophy, they often give a wonderful statement. They say that the reality might exist independent of ourselves. So why did they get this is not the question here, but what is the nature of reality is the question here. So that we try to look into. Then I'll spend a little time in this slide. Is it in auto mode? Okay, yeah, just wait. So you see research methods and mathematics. I mean, you see in general we have a tendency to do research. Anything we take, anything we do, we try to study it, and we have some creative ability. It's inherent, it's built in us. And from creativity, from our research credentials, we go into something called invention. So invention means we go very deep and we analyze, is there anything serious that we can take about it? Then when we invent something, then we are going even further, then we go into something called the nature of research. Okay, when we invent something, we don't think what is this invention is all about. But after we invent, we think, wow, is it so impactful? Like say the atom bomb, Oppenheimer commented that, he was spellbound when he developed this. But maybe at the time he was inventing, he was not thinking about it. So the nature of research will come out from the invention. And by analyzing the nature of research, we can try to get some understanding of the nature of the reality. And I would say that to understand the reality, we have 3 phases to understand. The physical, the second is the mathematical and philosophical, and the third is spiritual. The physical is related to our physical sensation, our senses. The mathematical is subject that connects us to philosophy, and if you go to pure mathematics, that does not connect us to philosophy, to the physical, takes us to philosophy. And if you go deep into philosophy, then you may gain into something called spirituality. So I would say that mathematics is the junction box between the physical and the metaphysical. It's a junction box. It's a very useful junction box. Yes, next. So my objectives, I have 3 objectives here. First, to look into the epistemological and ontological analysis of science and philosophy. That is how the research methods are, shaping out. Then the reality from Vedantic perspectives, like what our Vedanta says. And finally, how to bring these two together. Next, please. So, Professor Edward already conveyed what is epistemology. So, epistemology is knowledge acquisition of the system. So it goes more into the knowledge and the nature of the knowledge and the scope and validity of the knowledge. But what is important is ontology. Ontology goes even beyond, and it tries to see that, okay, given this knowledge, what are the entities that exist, what are the similarities, what entities are ignored and why. So in general, we start with an epistemological outlook and gradually we percolate it to the ontology of the system. Initially, we may not have an idea about the ontology of the system when we go in the bottom-up approach. Next, please. So now we go into the scientific, mathematical and philosophical research methods. Yeah. So I am teaching research methodology. This is a slide from my course. So basically any research that you do, you have something called parameters. That means you don't touch them, you just leave them aside. And then you have something called critical independent variables. Critical independent variables means you think that these are the degrees of freedom for you to do the research. You play with this. Like if you have a video game, you have a timing, and the timing with which you play the video game is a critical independent variable. And the points that you score is a critical dependent variable. So there's a typo there. It's a critical dependent variable, CDV, that you try to analyze, and you always consider the available literature if you have. So the question that comes to us is that, what are the parameters, what are the independent variables, and what are the dependent variables? And again, it is cyclic. It is cyclic means when you start, you don't know what is your parameters, what is your CDB, what is your CIV, but gradually, when you study the system deep, you will be able to come to this consensus. Next. So I'm taking a classical example that how the epistemology can provide us, the insights. I mean, the most important point of all the research methods that we have is that whatever we are comfortable, we try to work with it, and whatever we are not comforting, we are not working with it. For example, Professor Wiles is a famous mathematician. He resolved the Fermat's theorem, which was unsolved for 358 years. Now, in fact, Professor Wiles, he solved this problem after becoming a professor at Cambridge University. But he was very curious to take Fermat's theorem as his PhD problem during the Cambridge tenure as a PhD student. But his supervisor refused. He told him, if you take this example, you may not get the degree. Because say you can't solve the problem, who will give you the degree? So you can see that convenience is on the table. You always want to take problems that you can solve, that you can conceptualize, that you can analyze, that you think they can be solvable. But you don't go into very tough problems when you try to solve or understand the reality. So convenience is a table. Next, please. Then again, the second issue that comes to us is the human perception and the ability. That means if I am able to define something as a critical independent variable, then I can define it and I can define my research problem. And if I don't have the ability to define it, I just leave it, I just take it granted. For example, the origin of life problems, the evolution problem, they have been defined in a context that can be tackled. And you always ignore something that you can't define because it's beyond the scope of something. So in this regard, I'll give you another example. The Big Bang Theory. In the Big Bang Theory, there is no relevance to consciousness. But the moment you bring in the point of consciousness, then the entire Big Bang Theory will change. It will become Big Vision model. That's what Dr. T.D. Singh conveyed in his books. Because the scientists thought that consciousness is a product of matter, and because the scientists thought that the consciousness can be explained through mathematical systems, they have presented Big Bang Theory. If not, the Big Bang Theory would have been rejected straight away. So you can see that, again, whatever you can perceive, you're putting on the table, and whatever you're not perceiving, you're living it. So again, the epistemology is conveying that your perceptual limitations are playing a greater role in the research. So therefore, whatever you gain will have strong conditioning. Conditioning means, depending on your assumptions and presumptions, you will have your conclusions. Next, please. and this is the most important issue probably that has been discussed all through the way. I'll again convey. There is something called downward causation. So what is downward causation? It's something like human beings are able to define mathematics. But can mathematics define the human being? Can it be the reverse? It is not possible. An equation cannot represent a human being. An equation cannot correlate consciousness, because consciousness is at a higher level than the mathematical discoveries or the scientific discoveries. So the downward causation is strictly conveying that human consciousness is sitting above and the research problems are sitting below. So there is what is a duality here. Next, please. So similar views were presented by Mr. Anderson, who is a Nobel laureate in physics. He conveyed that science is all like bits and pieces. You take, different parts and you suddenly get some insight, you say classical mechanics. You suddenly get some insight, you say quantum mechanics. But you don't have anything that connects classical and quantum. So it's not holistic. It is like you go bits and pieces. That's why he said, psychology is not applied biology, nor biology applied chemistry. Because there are new laws, concepts, and generalizations that require creativity as a great degree as in the previous one. Next. Now if you go into mathematics, I am not a mathematician, so my encounter or my endeavor with mathematics has always been like I use mathematics as tools. Even the mathematical tools I take, you cannot define the degree of freedom. The degree of freedom is left to me. It's just a tool. On the tool, I can play as I want. So similarly, there are many assumptions in the tool itself. No equation is all perfect. If it is all perfect, it could explain everything in the reality. And there are many, many variables that are being ignored. And if you go into the foundations of these tools, again you will say that there is a relative degree of subjectivity. Another example that I have given in my article is the fundamental conception between Riemann geometry and the regular geometry. In Riemann geometry, you can connect 2 points by a curve. But before Riemann geometry is accepted, no one thought that you can connect 2 points by a curve. People thought that you can only join 2 points by a straight line. So it is a preconditioning that you can only connect 2 points by a straight line. And later, it is again another preconcept conditioning that you can connect 2 points by a curve. Whether you can connect 2 points by a straight line or a curve is a question. Whether there exist 2 points is a question. Because it's all your perception, it's all your preconditioning. So you can see that every theory like this has a limitation. Next, we have another issue. What is it? We have a mathematical ability, but we also know that mathematics is not able to play a greater role when you go very deep. That is, your empirical approach is going to have a serious problem because many, many problems are of philosophical nature and they are not of your mathematical nature. Next, please. I am giving you one example. I work in food technology. I am trying to develop some products using vegetables of Northeast India. So, the product formulation involves something called sensory analysis. That's what is being given there. So, sensory analysis means that even if you have developed a product, you must take the product and you must feed it to some person, and the person will give a grade between 1 to 10 and to say that this product is palatable, it's tasty, it's not tasty, and so many things. And finally, you get a score like 2.8 or 4 or 5 out of 10. So your mathematization is happening in a limited context. You cannot say that whatever you developed is the best, but you are saying, okay, it is to some extent you can quantify it. So the experience of a person is still considered to be required despite you doing a lot of research in the empirical world. So you can see experiences are also included in the scientific research. Next, I am coming to philosophy. Okay, not all mathematical problems are philosophical. Not all problems are mathematical. Some of them are philosophical. The biggest issue in philosophy, already our Edwards talk, as very nicely presented. There is formalism, so many isms are there, and all these isms are there because your assumptions or presumptions are all different, and depending on your assumptions or presumptions, you will have a different understanding of the reality. Some people consider that there is no reality, it is illusion. Some people think that reality is conscious. Some people think that it's timeless and eternal. Some people think it's nothing. So you see, depending on your presumptions, you will have different conceptions of reality, and therefore logic is not the way to prove what the reality is according to the Vedanta. So I've already elaborated to you scientific methodologies, research methodologies depend heavily on philosophy, and philosophy is having this problem that with the philosophy you can go nowhere. Next. Now I'm giving you some examples that says we have a reality beyond our common experiences. So first thing is the thesis evaluation. When you send a PhD thesis for evaluation, what happens? The reviewer goes through the thesis and the reviewer gives you some questions. Now the question is, can you write a program by which you can guess what are the questions that may be asked? The question is no, because the reviewer may be in a different world, the reviewer may ask questions in a different context which you can't predict. It's all depending on the subjective ability of the reviewer to analyze it. And second thing is, sometimes it happens that if the thesis goes to two reviewers, one of the reviewer accepts the thesis, another reviewer rejects the thesis. So, should the thesis be rejected altogether? No. In the university system we say, okay, now you let us have one more chance, give it to someone else. So you can see that the benefit of doubt is always given to the researcher, not to the person who has not done the research, because one who does the research will have a different experience than one who is reviewing the thesis. So always the benefit of doubt is given. So you can see that again philosophy is not able to go deep here. Next please. Again I am giving a simple example here, test drive. You have designed a beautiful car, it's so wonderful, but ultimately they'll say let me have a test drive. Without having a test drive, no one wants to buy a car. So again you can see that experience. Your empiricism, your philosophy, your thought process, everything went on well, but ultimately the person who is driving it should feel comfortable. So experience is again gaining a ground here. Next please. And this is the slide that I wanted to spend a little more time. We are nowadays having biofeedback on meditation. When someone is meditating, they actually forget what their experiences are. To the extent they remember, they can tell about their conscious experience. So, of course, in biofeedback, you'll get some data on the computer that measures the extent of meditation to some extent. But mostly in biofeedback, the type of answers people ask is they wake up the person, and after waking up the person, they'll ask what the experience is. And from there, they'll try to simulate what has actually happened. So you can see here that once you go into deep meditation, you are out of your cognition. You are in a different world. So you can again see that it is again beyond your ability to actually judge it. Next. Again, these examples have been given. I will not spend much time in this dream and drama. The dream and drama, I mean, we at this moment we feel them to be real, but when we open the eyes, we think that it is a fiction. Now, having given all this, so how to go ahead, let's go into the Vedantic perspectives. So I am taking two verses from Bhagavad Gita. One of the questions Professor Bhudev Sharma, asked was very, very, useful. Like, the question you asked to Professor Ghosh, it inspired me a lot. The first thing is, my perception of this Vedantic perspective is that you have to go to the right authority, and you have to always apply your ability, your common sense and your logic, or whatever to your extent you can do it, you can take it. So the authority we are presenting here is Bhagavad Gita, which is given by God himself. So you can see here in the 5th verse of the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, there is a superior energy of mind. He is saying that, oh Arjuna, beyond this material energy, there is a superior energy of mind which is the living entities. And he says one important point, who are struggling with material nature. So if this struggling with material nature means what? I can do it. Aham kara, I. Aham means I, kara means doing. Aham kara. This I can do it. I can analyze it. That attitude itself, the Lord is saying, is not good. Now another thing the Lord says here is that you are superior to the inferior nature. That's why you have this ability to understand the reality through your mathematics or science or cosmology or whatever. But the conclusion is that this ahankara is actually having a problem. Next. So the Lord says, this very famous verse in Bhagavad Gita that says, Daivi Hesha Gunamayi Mamaya Duratya. It says that, oh Arjuna, my illusory energy is very difficult to overcome. So you take a scientist, you take a mathematician, you take a group of mathematicians. I mean, they come out with a theory, but they are unable to generalize the theory. They are unable to bring it to a common consensus that you can have a universal mathematical theory. Because the three modes of material nature are actually at work. What are the three modes of material nature? Goodness, passion and ignorance. And these are not in the control of the person. These are actually controlling the thoughts and activities of a person due to the interaction with the consciousness of a person. So the Lord says, those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So if you want to get the pure knowledge or pure form of understanding the reality, then you have to go beyond the effect of the three modes of material nature. And the Lord says that if you surrender to Him, then He will give you the keyword. He will give you the password to go out of the three modes of material nature. So now these are two different sides. One end is we are saying you do your research, get some understanding of the reality. Other end the Lord says, okay, whatever understanding of the reality you have, it will be time pass. You're passing time, that's all. So how to actually bring them together? So let's look into that. So I'm taking a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, where the originator of Sankhya philosophy, Kapila, is conveying the message that the most important point here is that, again, he is again conveying that because of lording it over material nature, we are not able to resolve a problem. And the important issue is, just like a dream, will have all sorts of disadvantages. So, you develop a mathematical theory. This mathematical theory is the product of, according to Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, this mathematical theory is a product of the mode of ignorance, mixed with the mode of goodness. You are good, that's why you are philosophical. But it is not pure goodness. If it is pure goodness, it should take you to detachment. That's what Bhagavad Gita says in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The Lord says that from goodness you get detachment, from passion you get fruitive action, and from ignorance you become lazy. So the detachment part is not coming. The attachment part is still there. You are still attached that you would like to understand the reality through your mathematical dimension or the research ability. But the Lord clearly says in the previous slide that because you have this ability that you can actually lord it over material nature, that you can actually come over it, you have all sorts of disadvantages. So you have theory after theory, you have theory after theory, and the theory will come today and the theory will go tomorrow, and ultimately you just have a junk box in which all the rubbish papers are there. One rubbish paper is not connected to another rubbish paper. So that's what is being conveyed here. Next, please. So therefore, what is the way out? The Lord says here, by discovering the faultiness of his desiring to lord it over material energy. We are not the lord of the material energy. In fact, we don't even know how food is getting digested in our body and converting into blood. We just say, okay, through science I know something. But if you know something, it should be perfect. We don't know how we are dying. We die. And until the age of 7 or 8, we don't know what we are thinking. We are not conscious of the reality, external. So the Lord says, you give it up. You give up this faultiness to lord it over material nature. Then the Lord says, then the living entity becomes independent and stands in his own glory. So giving up, of course, it's being explained in several other places. Giving up is only possible if we become devotee of God. If you don't become devotee of God, then this giving up nature will always stay, whether it will stay in a mathematical format, or whether it will stay in a research format, or whether it will stay in a sensory analysis format. In any format it will stay. It will not go away. So surrendering to God, that's the central principle of this material world. That when we try to see things independent of God, whether it is research, whether it is management, whether it is career, whether it is values, whether it is stress, whether it is philosophy, then definitely, because we are trying to lord it over the material, we think we can manage the show. But actually, it is subtle reality is so wonderful. It is mystical because it's divine energy of God. Mama Maya Duratyaya. The Lord says, Mama Maya, it is my divine energy which you cannot overcome. Next, please. So the roadmap for synthesis is to consider all these points. Consciousness is beyond matter and intelligence. Consciousness is not a product of matter. And we have to give away this lording over material nature. And the relative reality involves servitude. See, another issue that we try to do is we are always serving. We don't realize. As a father, mother, son of the country, we are always serving. The servitude is always there within us. But since we are serving the non-absolute, we will have the non-absolute research conclusions. That is, today we do something, tomorrow we do something else. Yesterday what we did, we are not happy. Today what we are doing, we are not happy. Tomorrow what we do, we will not be happy. We will never be happy. Because that lording over material nature is inbuilt into the programming of the soul. So therefore you have the temporary cognizance and temporary bliss, and you can see until you go into it, you think everything is manageable. But the moment you go into it, you will find it tipsy-topsy. Everything you do. You think you can take a flight. Okay, you have taken a flight. Now after you take a flight, are you sure you will reach your destination? God knows. Yeah, you may say excellent, monitoring this, that, this. Ultimately, it's all communication. It's all, it's a matter of faith, and you should be always positive that yes, everything will happen nicely. So you can see optimism is always there in your life, and faith is always there in your life. And the more you go deep into it, then you'll have several mysteries. Next, please. So therefore, the absolute reality, if you perceive from the relative reality, there should be primacy of consciousness. See, many a times we find that many Vedantic scholars or many Sankhya scholars say that in the pure consciousness there is no activity. But Bhagavatam clearly says that in the pure consciousness one is always a servant of God and always trying to get enjoyed by serving the Lord. And it is convergent of the reality. Convergent means I have already conveyed to you. You go scientific, very deep, you go into philosophy. You go very deep into philosophy, you go into the spiritual dimension. You go very deep into spiritual dimension, you go into the personal aspect of the Lord. That's what the Bhagavatam says. Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaneti iti sabhyate. First canto, second chapter, 11th verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. Says, learn transcendentalists, understand the absolute as impersonal Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. All three. And the highest is Bhagavan. So the servitude to the Supreme Lord is the most important, and that is the most fundamental aspect of the absolute reality. And in this position there is no duality, pain or suffering, and one will have eternality, cognizance and bliss. Next please. So now how to integrate? The first thing is our methodology should be very universal. So our Dr. T.D. Singh, he already gave a wonderful statement in one of his books. What he conveyed is that when the scientists discover a new science, they want to add some existing scientific concepts to the existing material concepts. So the scientific mind does not want to shun away its fundamental, logic, reasoning or, ability to resolve or analyze. But he says this is exactly the problem of all the theories. You have theory after theory, theory after theory. But at some point of time, you have to bring spirituality. But many people think that spirituality means you don't know anything, that's why you're adding. It is not like that. At this moment, you don't know anything. But there are people who have realized it. Sadhu and Guru. Holy people are there. They always realize it, this part of the reality. At this moment, you have not realized. Just like an example we also find in Dr. T.D. Singh's books is a small kid going to a chemistry laboratory and asking, can you prove to me carbon plus oxygen gives carbon dioxide? To a professor of chemistry. The professor produces carbon dioxide, puts it on a gas chromatograph, he'll show the peak and he'll prove it. So our approach to reality should be like that. Like there are professors of spiritual knowledge, and we are presently like small kids who are inquisitive and who have faith in understanding the reality by going to the professors of the spiritual knowledge. So Dr. T.D. Singh conveys that we need to add some spiritual or non-material elements within the concepts of the new science, and if we do this, then we will understand all the truths, including the knowledge of God. Next, please. So the steps that I have conveyed in the synthesis model is, okay, if you are starting from science, you take epistemology and ontology. When you go to the ontology of science, then you will find that in the ontology part, you can see what elements are missing in science. Science does not give any value to consciousness. Consciousness is taken granted, and all theories are being built without bringing in consciousness. So therefore, the moment you take this ontology, you go to the philosophy, which is bereft of physical observation. Then when you do the philosophical analysis, there also you will find that there are divergent characteristics of the reality. When you do the epistemological analysis and ontological analysis of philosophy. Then you take up the independent study of Vedanta. Again, Vedanta, there are several versions. There is a Sankhya version, there is a Brahman version, there is a Paramatma version, there is a Bhagavan version. But the conclusion for all this is Bhagavad Gita, according to my understanding. Bhagavad Gita summarizes everything. The Lord says, Machita sarva durgani, mat prasadat tarishyati. 18th chapter, 58th verse. The Lord says, Machita sarva durgani. If you keep your consciousness on me, I will take you out from all sorts of durgas or miseries. By my mercy, you will come out of it. And he also says, Atachetvam ahankaran. However, if you don't do this, Atachetvam ahankaran. If you have the ahankara, if you have the false ego, then nas roshyasi, by not listening to me. How your ahankara is there? By not listening to me. Nas roshyasi vinashyasi. You will be lost. So this is like one of the verses in the last chapter of Bhagavad Gita, in which the Lord has explicitly stated that you depend on me, you keep me always in the center, you become conscious of me, then I'll take care of everything, all sorts of problems, including your research problem. Everything will be gone. So then you can go with the model that we have presented here, the integration of science, philosophy and spirituality. Next please. So when you try to spiritualize science, the sum of the points that I am trying to convey here is assumptions. No scientist tells you what he or she is assuming, because they are also not clear what these assumptions are. It is like a revelation. They are thinking, something pops out. What pops out, they try to go deep into it, but they don't understand that why it is popping out like this. So go into the presumptions and assumptions, target axioms, then you are one step ahead. You go to philosophy. And in the philosophy, you will be exploring all possible abilities. You will have deep thinking, keep thinking. And finally, you will come to a conclusion that philosophy also is going to break you down, because it's not going to come out of your thought process, because your thought process is contaminated by the three modes of material nature. So finally, you will become spiritual. Next please. Conclusions. So you can see that research methods, whether you take science, social, whatever it is, they will definitely make you philosophical. But this is where people will be stuck. I've seen many philosophers, they are stuck to their theories. They don't move out of their theories because it's their realization. There's nothing wrong about it. But a more important issue is go deep into philosophy. What exactly makes a person to have a particular philosophy or a particular thought process that made them philosophically competent to present a theory? Go deep there. And then another issue is that somehow or the other, even empirical research is accepting the science of consciousness, like sensory analysis I have already presented to you. So you can have a nice synthesis model of Dr. T.D. Singh, and you can have, you can transform yourself to a spiritualist and also devotee of Lord Krishna. Next, please. So finally, I end up my presentation with this beautiful verse of Bhagavad Gita, in which the Lord has explicitly stated what is Sankhya. So let me read out 5th chapter, 5th verse of Bhagavad Gita. It states, Yat Sankhya prapyate sthanam tad yogair apigamyate. It says, one who knows the position reached by means of renunciation can be also attained by works in devotional service. So whatever you do devotion to God, yoga here means devotion. It does not refer to any other form of yoga, because the Lord confirms this again in another verse. In the 47th verse of the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says this, Yoginam api sarvesham madgater antaratmana. All the yogis, my devotee is the best of the yogis. So the yogi here conveys one who is devoted to God. And it says that if you take Sankhya, you should also come to the same platform of devotion to God. So any Sankhya that you take bereft of the Lord's position, that's why the Lord is 24 material elements, the soul, the super soul. So 27 elements, 24 material elements, every Sankhya researcher presents nicely. But 3 things they are not presenting. Soul, of course, that also they present. But they forget time and God. So time and God is something that is even, time is called the mixing element of all these material elements, and God is of course regulating everything. And it says, Ekam Sankyam cha Yogam cha. It says that one who sees that Sankhya and Yoga are always connecting, Ya Pashyati, Sa Pashyati. So they see things as they are. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now the question answer round is open. Anyone want to ask any question? So feel free to ask.
Good afternoon, sir. So in one of your slides, you told us that math is conceived by humans, but it cannot define humans. It cannot define the human form. But then again, if God has made us, then we won't probably be able to define God, right? Using research and then step by step moving towards the spiritual entity. If what we've conceived cannot define us, what God has apparently conceived should not be able to define God, right? Then whatever we're trying to do is a complete, well, I want to be disrespectful, should be a complete waste, considered a waste of time, right?
Very good question. Please clap. I'll try to answer it like this. Why are you eating food?
So it can give me energy for my daily process.
That is secondary. That you are telling as an intelligent person. Why are you eating food?
Because I like it.
Yes. You are hungry, you are eating food. So, by nature we got our mind and intelligence. You can't just ignore it. So an intelligent way of using the intelligence and the mind is this way. So if you don't use it, it will be like, you have intelligence and you will be living like, any other person. So the Lord is conveying that you use your intelligence properly. Again, I'll give you another verse of Bhagavad Gita. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmara yudhyacha. 8th chapter, 7th verse of Bhagavad Gita. Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu. The Lord says, always, mam anusmara yudhyacha. You think of me and you fight. Mai arpita manobuddhir. And what he's saying? He's not saying, okay, you become dumb. You just mechanically throw arrows. He's saying, Mai arpita manobuddhir. You apply your mind and intelligence as an offering to me. So therefore, whatever facility you have been given, there's another nice, poem written by a very great saint of our Sampradaya. Manasa deha geha jo kichu more, arpilu tuapade nandakishore. So if you think I am mind, if you think I am body, whatever you think, I want to offer it as a service to God. So is that clear? Okay, thanks.
Okay, there's one more question over there at the back.
So I have a question. We heard last day also and today also, there are many axioms, and if you consider the entire history of science, there have been many instances where there have been many breakthroughs based on some sudden idea which comes to a scientist. So so where does this kind of revolutionary idea come from?
Our Professor Charles Towns conveyed, no one knows where these ideas are coming from. They are like revelations. Okay. So that's why you are thinking of something, you get an idea. To what extent this idea is applicable, you don't know. And what is the basis of this idea also, you don't know. So these two issues, they remain. Is that clear?
Thank you so much. And thanks again, Professor Ramgopal Uppaluri, for this lovely talk.